For the next discussion, I would like to invite Mr. Asaf Barnea, Chief Executive Officer of Sonara Ventures, and Franz Van-Houten, the CEO of Philips, for a conversation about the digital, connected, exponential future of health and medicine.
To see you again.
Thank you, thank you. And I'd like to start with an untypical question, and actually a quote from Walt Disney. And Walt Disney is known to say the phrase, if you can dream it, you can make it. Now, never in my life did I dream that Disney will step into healthcare. How did it happen?
We have a collaboration between Philips and Disney, which is to improve the experience of a radiology exam. It's proven that stress in the MRI, for example, makes that the diagnosis is not good, and then you need to repeat it. Especially this is the case for children, but also for adults. And by collaborating with Disney, we bring their animations into the radiology room, and it distracts patients, it quiets them down, takes the stress away, so that you get in first-time right image acquisition. So it's a better patient experience, really. And I'm also very happy that Disney now realizes that they can also engage, with people outside of the films or the parks. Right now, they really want to impact the health of people, which is amazing.
Was this a tough decision? Was this truly out of the blue decision to step into such collaboration for corporates such as Philips?
No, actually, in Philips, we have been building these ambient experience rooms much longer. And we have been taking also images from Dutch masters from the Rijksmuseum. We know Disney from years ago, from the consumer days that we had consumer electronics. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think, pretty new for Disney to go beyond movies and entertainment. But it's a relationship that is off to a very good start.
I have to say, this is one of the very few press releases. When I read it, I was smiling. This is really putting the patient in the center, and the children, their anxiety, claustrophobic in some cases. So this has really made me smile. We're now in the MEDinISRAEL conference, and I'd like to focus, with your permission, on the presence of Philips in Israel, which have grown. I have to say, when we have started Sonara, Philips in Israel were like 600 people, and now you're 1,700. And you've been defined by, at least by the Export Institute, which is hosting that conference, as the largest exporter out of Israel for the last few years. So this is a true acknowledgement of the efforts and support. Tell us a little bit about Philips' presence in Israel and how you foresee the future.
Asaf, you and I have discussed before how impressed I am with the talent base in Israel and the entrepreneurship and innovativeness. So we gladly took the decision to expand our footprint, mm-hmm. which partly was organic. So we already had, for example, a computer tomography presence, and we even brought a factory in Israel, so that's also why we are exporting so much. So I think it's pretty unique that we are doing not only R&D and innovation, but also manufacturing. We've also done a number of acquisitions that have boosted our presence. And we have several partnerships, because the ecosystem of innovative companies in Israel is pretty strong, and you don't always have to own a company, you can partner with them. And we just announced in the last several months two exciting partnerships, one with Inside Tech in December, which is all about expanding access to MR-guided focused ultrasound therapy. Mm-hmm. For example, in the neuro space. Mm-hmm. And we also have a partnership with, I think I pronounce it, DIA Imaging Analysis, exactly. Which is also from last year, which is enhancing ultrasound through AI quantification methodologies, which, again, is so relevant because you want to support the radiologist or the sonographer with a quantified study. Right? So it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, at least in Israel, we have, it seems that we are stepping slowly but surely a little bit away from the pandemic. But I'd like to focus on the atmosphere these last 12 months, actually, and the challenging atmosphere, I would say. On one side, the opportunity which arose out of this pandemic. On the other, the challenges, probably the considerations and the challenges that really facing a big company such as Philips. How was it, actually, the last 12 months? A little bit of the inside, of the behind the scene, if I may.
Well, first of all, from a human side, it's like everybody else. The associates of Philips, the 80,000 people that work for Philips, we all had to adapt to a world of remote working from home. That went actually pretty flawlessly. Mm-hmm. We were also able to keep all our factories running. But then, of course, early March 2020, all the phones were ringing because people needed more critical care equipment like monitors, ventilators, ICU setups. And we decided to ramp up our manufacturing capacity during the lockdown, which was an incredible feat. And we quadrupled the output almost overnight in 2 months' time, so that we could help all the providers in the world with their critical care needs. So that, what you could say, was the immediate response, which was gratifying as it's part of our purpose. But then I think the silver lining of the pandemic is that people realize that digital and cloud technologies is a way to actually make care better, more accessible, even remotely, but also to improve the patient-staff ratio so that you can handle more patients, which during COVID was, of course, very astute. For example, through command center technology, where you can overlook a large cohort of beds, a COVID department, from a central point. And through algorithms, you can then see how patients are tracking and direct the care to who needs it most. And we have seen an adoption of telehealth already last year that I think is there to stay with us. And like you said, Asaf, a crisis is also an opportunity, and I completely agree with that. I think we will see an acceleration in the way healthcare is being provided around the world. On the one hand, to care for the infectious disease that COVID is, but on the other hand, to transform the way elective care is being delivered, and also how chronic patients can be supported on a more regular basis remotely. And then, of course, all the technologies that is also coming out of Israel, like sensor technology and algorithms and care pathways and workflows will be, I think, very much in demand. So it is an exciting period to reimagine how healthcare is being provided.
So my next question is actually related to, on one side, the challenging times and the period that we have been experiencing. But on the other, despite those challenges, Philips actually bought few companies and acquired few companies, specifically two that probably you would like to mention, biotelemetry and Capsule. When you did mention the remote component, the ability to treat people beyond just the regular care, what do those acquisitions mean for Philips? Does that state actually the strategy of Philips going forward?
Yeah, let me start a bit earlier in my answer to your question, Asaf. And so Philips has undergone a massive transformation. We have exited many of the legacy activities and focus on health technology. We are growing faster, but we also realize that acquisitions can be part of the way to augment and expand our portfolio. We use the health continuum as a representation of how healthcare needs to evolve. I've mentioned how cloud technologies can also enable a relationship with a patient remotely through telehealth. But then you need a lot of new technologies. And the two acquisitions that you mentioned are actually helping us to reinforce remote care. Biotelemetry is a leader in cardiovascular diagnostics, such as, for example, continuous heart rate monitoring and Holter technology, enabled through the cloud, and then the data are being analyzed and a report is generated to give advice and clinical decision support to the physician. Capsule Technologies is a company that provides interoperability in the Internet of Things. you can imagine that there are so many machines and devices that all need to integrate to the hospital informatics system. And all these data need to be streamed real time and then interpreted to the central point. And Capsule is the market leader in device interoperability to unlock all that data and to bring it forward. Now, the pattern that I'm describing is one where we are investing heavily in telehealth and analytics and informatics so that we can integrate the world of care, make it less siloed, and connect patients and doctors in new ways through the cloud in a very exciting way. So it's a very rewarding time because we see our strategy validated. COVID will accelerate the adoption of informatics and telehealth, and that we were able to do acquisitions during the pandemic is just very gratifying, and we will not be stopped, right? We are moving forward.
So moving forward, Frans, I'd like to really focus a little bit about the ecosystem of a giant. I was actually forbidden to say a gorilla, but typically I am asking how you dance with the gorilla, how startup companies do dance with the gorilla, not necessarily just Philips, but the others. And this is actually, you know, in Israel, we have 1,500 life science companies, out of which I would say probably 70 to 80% are startup companies. So it's a very vibrant ecosystem. Now, if we are to look into Philips collaboration, what is the stand, the positioning, the share value of Philips? On one side, there's a huge corporate, and the startup community, let it be in Israel or let it be elsewhere?
Well, you know, maybe we used to think about it as a tribe rather than as an alpha male, right? And in a tribe, you can work together. You can together form an ecosystem. We have learned that we cannot do everything on our own. We have, of course, organic growth. We can do acquisitions, but we also need partnerships. And I do believe that we can help each other. I mean, the startups and the big company. And startups bring passion, creativity, new insights, discoveries, innovations in ways that a big company cannot always do that. At the same time, we have access to over 100 countries, and we can provide a highway to the customers, to the hospitals for these startups. Moreover, startups can also use some of our platform technology. I just mentioned Capsule as a way to do systems integration with the hospital IT systems. Well, you know, startups may also benefit from that, so that their path to value, their path to revenue can be faster, right? Instead of having to develop the whole stack on their own. And so we actually embrace and love to work with ventures, startups, and collaborate and even help them succeed, right? Because as I said in the beginning, this world is going too fast. It's too big to do everything on your own. It's just not imaginable. So we have an active program around venturing. This is also why we are happy to be invested in Sanara Ventures, right? As a way to meet and creative startups and help them succeed.
There's one company, if you can share light a little bit on the collaboration between Philips and TaylorMade, one of the Sanara portfolio companies, which as an example to show the benefit on one side for Philips, on the other for the startup itself by collaborating.
Yeah, I think TaylorMade is a good example, right? I mean, it started its journey with Philips joining Sanara Ventures, and we met there, and I think we discovered their value. Now, for the people that don't know, TaylorMade is a point solution aimed at managing so-called financial toxicity. I'm sure that's still pretty vague, but you know, if you take a cancer patient, that cancer patient is confronted with a very challenging disease, and on top, you get hit by financial disaster. And in all fairness and transparency, you need to help the patient also take care of the cost of the treatment and also plot, you know, what is the best way forward. And TaylorMade is a very clever company that helps provide insight in basically the cost and the affordability of the pathway. And It's a good example of what we just talked about of a startup and a corporate working together. We are exploring ways to incorporate TaylorMade's services in our oncology informatics platform and provide thereby an integrated offering, right, while TaylorMade remains an independent company.
One of the things, Frans, that sometimes I find it a little bit tough is when we talk about the Israeli ecosystems or other ecosystem with startups, is actually the support of giants such as Philips for pre-revenue companies. And in that case, I see every now and then, the ability to become a design partner while in the process of the R&D, or in another case, to validate both the technology in hospitals, for instance, as well as the business models. Because I think now, with digital health, we shall be looking into more and more new business models with the transition to value-based medicine. Can you share us a little bit of the perspective of the new business model that you've been seeing, or those that you would like to see within the startup community or within Philips, that now we shall be seeing more and more from the transition to digitalization of services?
Well, I think, first of all, the digitization is an opportunity for startups to reach the market faster. And especially if we all design to an open and interoperable platform, then a startup can coexist with the corporate, and we can take the startup's technology or application into our ecosystem and offer it around the world to these customers. That was, in fact, the way of working with TaylorMade. Now, big companies are not always easy to deal with. And this is why at Philips we have a venturing department and that then can team up with the ventures, the startups, and also help navigate how to do business with Philips, so that together we can get to success quickly. For us, it was also an important realization that we needed to organize in order to work together with startups and cannot be taken for granted. And I think it has made us more agile and approachable, so that we can work in both worlds, the startup world and the large corporate world, which to get access to the hospitals is also necessary, right? Because we provide access to the CIOs and the chief medical officers and the hospitals around the world, sure, and can speed up time to market for these startups in a way that they can never do alone.
Which could be a beautiful support to those early stage companies knocking on someone's door, and if they do come alongside with Philips, it's a game changer.
And even for the pre-revenue, Asaf, for the pre-revenue companies that you spoke about, we can also provide contacts for feedback, right? To test ideas and propositions. So this collaboration can go pretty far.
The last question that I have is also your advice to startup companies. From your perspective, what would be, a number one advice from your position to startups that you have met, or to generally to the ecosystem when they talk to providers, when they talk to the corporates, when they talk to healthcare manufacturers? What would that advice be?
Well, I think, first of all, it's an exciting time to be in healthcare because we will go through an acceleration phase and innovations will be adopted faster than before, which I think is good news for startups. And my advice is that people in the startup space need to reach out and listen to what is happening, get feedback, be prepared to collaborate and share, because neither of us can do it alone. And there's much value to be created by actually collaborating and going on that learning curve together, right? And sometimes you see in startups a bit of scare, right? If I tell you this, you will run away with my ID. That is not the case. In fact, it's better to engage and share because your learning curve will be much faster.
I think if
what would be your advice, Asaf? Because you are so much closer to all these startups than I am.
Actually, pinpointing your one of the sentences you've mentioned is listen. I find it sometimes, in some cases, whereby startups do not listen. They're just in a selling mode. They want to sell and sell and sell instead of changing and getting the reflection and the feedbacks and listen carefully. And exactly as you've mentioned, Frans, this is the best time to acknowledge the importance of knowledge sharing. Not just between the startup community, but with corporates, with the providers, we need to listen to one another more and build those partnerships more. And I truly appreciate your time and attention that you have shared with us, especially now for the MEDinISRAEL conference and the ongoing process that we have with Philips. Thank you much, Franz.
Okay, well, and I say hi to everybody in Israel. It's great to work with you.
Beautiful. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Van-Houten and Mr. Barnea.